Welcome to the Physionic broadcast, where we delve into the top health news of the month. Today, we'll be covering medical peculiarities, gene-edited babies, and new medical delivery. So, without further ado, let's jump into the news. Everyone's coughed, maybe even had an infection like bronchitis, in which coughing can be so excessive that you feel the expression coughing up a lung might come true for you. Fortunately, it's as far from possible as you can get. But for one man, something extremely strange and extremely rare happened. He didn't cough up a lung, but he did cough up a blood clot perfectly preserved in the shape of his bronchial tree, making up the airway of the lung. The guy came to the hospital because he was undergoing medical procedures for a failing heart, severe cardiovascular disease. As standard procedure, the doctors gave him anticoagulants. This allows, in the event of an injury or other clotting stimulus, that the blood doesn't coagulate, leading to potential thrombosis or clotting. The benefit of this is to keep the blood thinned so procedures are less likely to encounter obstructions, which could lead to lethal ischemia or the lack of blood flow due to an obstruction, like a clot. However, the anticoagulant may not have functioned quite as planned, as the body of this particular individual is thought to have continued to release clotting agent in response. This led to a greater and greater level of clotting, which ended up lining his pulmonary airway, the aforementioned bronchial tree. You can imagine the doctor's surprise when the man coughed up so violently that a 6-inch blood clot in perfectly preserved shape of his lung popped out. Interestingly enough, this is not the only documented case of this happening. Nearly 100 years ago, a woman coughed up an odd mixture of cells, likely a layer of immune cells, due to an infection of the lung, in the shape of her lung as well. To be clear, this is incredibly uncommon, considering cases pop up every several decades. So the next time you cough, don't think you're going to pop a lung. How do you feel about gene editing humans from birth? You may not have long to decide. Recently, a Chinese scientist claims to have done it using a relatively new but extremely influential technology called CRISPR. CRISPR is a gene editing technique that uses a protein with a guide RNA to bind specific sites on DNA strands and manipulate them. So, He Jiankui, the scientist in question, used this technology to manipulate a section of DNA that is responsible for encoding a protein that the human immunodeficiency virus, most often referred to as HIV, enters the cells through. The idea is that if this protein on the cell is mutated or non-existent, then the HIV virus will have difficulty entering the cell and will make the child immune to HIV. The thought process makes sense and can work, but there are a series of factors aside from the moral implications that should be considered. First, CRISPR, as with any technique, is never 100% accurate. So a person can believe they've edited the correct segment and not done so at all, or not in the intended way. Secondly, our cells do not produce things for fun. They synthesize proteins that will be useful, and the manipulation of that process without understanding all the uses of that protein can lead to off-target effects. Essentially, these children may be HIV resistant, yet be unable to fulfill basic biological functions. That would be a catastrophic issue. Finally, the moral issues are a problem in themselves, as the scientific community and even governments are in intense debate over what should be done and what this means for the future of science. Do you think that gene editing should be used in any capacity? Wins in medical science. When a person has an asthma attack, they sometimes use an inhaler to open the airway via a variety of different chemical compounds proven to fulfill that function. This is effective but acute, meaning it fixes the issue for the short term. Many of the diseases we suffer from today may be difficult to cure with a one-time injection or inhalation, but most people would be satisfied with long-term relief that would need to be continuously administered. That may be on the horizon for some lung-related diseases caused by genetic abnormalities that either shorten a person's life or make it difficult to live relative to healthy individuals. Scientists have found a way to bypass genetics by simply administering the mRNA that genes transcribe directly to the patient's cells. Simply by breathing these aerosol mRNA, the mRNA have been found to enter the epithelial cells of the lungs and be translated into their appropriate proteins. That means if a person is producing the wrong mRNA or producing a truncated form of the mRNA, it could be replaced exogenously via breathing of the complete, appropriate mRNA, which would then be incorporated into the cells to be translated into the correct protein for cellular function, essentially regaining lost function. Fascinatingly, these scientists have shown that the therapy is extremely specific to the appropriate lung epithelia they are trying to target, as they've shown in animal models through tagging the mRNA with a glowing tag that only specific cells illuminate in the lung. Another win for medical science. If this makes it to the mainstream, people with debilitating genetic diseases could lead perfectly normal lives by simply inhaling this treatment, a huge advantage over something like acute treatments that only deal with the symptoms. This would offer a temporary cure that would simply need to be administered regularly, but would not only deal with some of the symptoms, but all the symptoms and their underlying cause. And that concludes our Physionic broadcast. I hope you found it informative, and if you have opinions on any of the stories, let me know in the comments. See you next time.